Hello again and welcome back to the channel. This is Michael from TOEFLresources.com. In today's video, a quick look at the new TOEFL writing question. Now, as most of you know, the independent essay is going to be removed from the TOEFL test on July 26th of this year. It's going to be replaced by something called the Writing for an Academic Discussion task, and that's what you see on the screen right now. So let's start the video by just exploring how this question is designed and what you're going to see on test day. First up, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll first see some instructions, and they're going to say something like, your professor is teaching a class on marketing. Write a post responding to the professor's question. In your response, you should express and support your personal opinion, make a contribution to the discussion in your own words, and it will say that an effective response will contain at least 100 words, and you will have 10 minutes to write. Actually, you're going to have 10 minutes to read everything and write, so please keep that in mind. Now, it could be any kind of class, right? Today it's marketing, it could be political science, it could be business, it could be history, it could be any subject that a first-year student might take. After you read the instructions, you'll get the actual question. In this case, the question is, hello class. Next week, we'll be discussing the impact of social media influencers on consumer behavior. With the rise of social media platforms like Instagram and YouTube, we've seen the emergence of a new type of celebrity, the social media influencer. These influencers have large followings and can sway consumer behavior by endorsing products or services. What are your thoughts on this? Now, I'll mention a couple things about the questions. First up, I've been looking at the sample questions published so far by ETS, and yes, I'll put a link to those down below. And some of them are quite challenging. They had one question about how people are leaving the countryside of certain nations and moving to the cities. And the question is like, how would you reverse this trend? There was another question about streaming video platforms and whether or not they will make traditional cinemas obsolete. So you can see some of these questions are pretty challenging. Also, I want to point out that this is a very open-ended question. In my case, it just ends with, what are your thoughts on this? So in this case, you can write basically anything, right? Whatever your opinion is regarding social media influencers. Other times you might get more of a yes or no or two choices question. So it might be something like, some people believe that social media influencers are very harmful to society, while others believe that they're very helpful. What do you think? So in that case, it's less open-ended and you just have to pick a side. In any case, on the right-hand side of your screen, you will see two student responses to the same question. In this case, we get Jack first of all, and Jack says, I think social media influencers have a significant impact. When young people start admiring these influencers and trust their recommendations, they are more likely to buy products or services that they endorse. However, I also think that there are some concerns about the authenticity of these endorsements, as some influencers may promote products that they don't actually use or believe in. That's Jack's response. You'll notice his response is less than 100 words. Generally, these student responses are much less than 100 words. So remember, you do need to write more than the two students that you're reading. Next up is Emily, and Emily says, I'm not convinced that social media influencers have a significant impact on consumer behavior. While they may have large followings, most people are smart enough to make their own purchasing decisions based on their needs and preferences. Plus, there are so many influencers out there promoting different products that it can be hard to know who to trust. And then on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, there's a window where you will write your response. And you'll get the buttons like cut, paste, undo, redo, and there'll also be a word count displayed as you type. You can choose to hide the word count if you like. And that's basically how the question works. As I said, you've got 10 minutes to read all of this and write your response. Let's talk about what your response might contain now. So, I've spent the last couple of weeks uploading dozens or possibly hundreds of sample responses to the e-rater used by ETS to partially score this task. That's the automated scoring system that's combined with a human rater on test day. And I'll put a link so you can do the same as you prepare for the test. But I've discovered a few things which I think form the basis of a solid response to this task. As I've uploaded sample responses, I've discovered that a good response is usually about 120 words. You can write more if you want, but it's probably not necessary. A good response usually contains one or more subordinating conjunctions. And I'll show you some examples in a moment. A good response usually contains 3 or more coordinating conjunctions, 2 of them unique. That is, you can repeat one of them a couple times. And they also, of course, contain correct grammar. You want to avoid making grammar and language use mistakes. And of course, on top of all this, they're on topic. They address the question you've actually been asked. Let's take a look at a few samples. So here's one that I wrote, and I uploaded this to the e-rater, and it got a score of 5, which is the highest possible score. I'll read it to you quickly. While I appreciate the points mentioned by Jack and Emily, I think that social media stars aren't particularly influential nowadays. Nowadays, consumer behavior is affected by many different things, not just what we see on the internet. 20 years ago, a charismatic person might have convinced us to buy something we didn't really need, but I don't think that happens so often today. Remember that the choices people make are also impacted by their peers, by their family members, and even by traditional advertising. So the internet isn't a dominant force in their lives. Some people may feel that influencers are more powerful than ever, but I think their impact is actually declining. So this isn't a really fancy answer. I mean, the best thing is that my grammar is perfect, right? But I'm not using really fancy language. This is pretty standard, normal, typical vocabulary. I've even repeated words a few times. I repeated nowadays like twice in a row. I just noticed that now. Well, what do I have here? Well, I've got a subordinating conjunction at the very beginning, while, and that creates a complex sentence. And then I've got these coordinating conjunctions, which create compound sentences, but, so, and but. And in terms of making this a fancy, complicated, sophisticated answer, that's about it. However, it's good enough. It got a score of 5 from the e-rater. You should probably do the same. And there's a few things in here that you might call a template. And you could try using them in your answer. And so you can see I started with, while I appreciate the points mentioned by Jack and Emily, I think that. So that's sort of like a template sentence you can use, and it'll help you create a complex sentence right at the very beginning. You'll get that subordinating conjunction in. You can also use this phrase, remember that, before introducing some supporting detail. And that usually makes it easier to use the coordinating conjunction so. You try it out, you'll see what I mean. And then you kind of end your answer with a sort of concession sentence, which reflects the opposite opinion. Some people may feel that, and then you state, kind of the opposite of your opinion, but I think, and that helps you make the compound sentence. And again, it serves as sort of a template that you can use when you're making your own answers. I don't think templates in this task will be as useful as they were in the independent task before July 26th, but these are some phrases you might want to play around with as you prepare for the test. This response here mostly focuses on my own ideas. I'm pretty much ignoring Jack and Emily. Even though I mentioned them at the beginning, I'm not really talking about their specific ideas and their specific points here. I don't think that's necessary. You can totally focus on your own idea if you wish. However, let's take a look at another possible response. This one also got a score of 5. This one's much more complicated. It's got much longer and more sophisticated vocabulary, and it's got a fairly long sentence near the beginning. It also got a score of 5. Let's check it out. In my opinion, social media influencers aren't as significant as some people suggest. I agree with Emily's idea that people are too smart to be influenced by them. I'd add that 20 years ago, a charismatic person might have convinced us to buy something we didn't really need, but that doesn't happen so much nowadays because we can thoroughly research whatever products we are interested in using blogs, consumer magazines, and social media. Since we can use these sources of information to find goods that exactly suit our needs, we aren't swayed by the exaggerated claims of social media influencers. Jack raised the relevant point that young people are especially vulnerable. However, parents today are well informed about the media, so they take the time to educate their kids about misinformation online. So you can see this is a longer response. I think it's like 130 words. The previous one was like 110. And in addition to being more sophisticated, it specifically refers to the ideas mentioned by the other two students. If you feel more comfortable doing that, if it makes it easier for you to write a long answer, you can go ahead and do that. You can contribute to the discussion by specifically responding to the other two students. That's another possible approach. And that basically is all you really need to know about this task. But before we finish, here's a few more like template sentences or template phrases that you can try in your answer. You can start with something like, in my opinion, and then you state your main idea. In this case, I use the phrase, I agree with Emily's idea that, and then I kind of said, or I repeated something she mentioned, and I said, I'd add that. Down here, I use the template phrase, Jack raised the relevant point that, and I mentioned something he brought up, however, and then I kind of challenged it. So again, those are some sort of template phrases you can play around with as you experiment a little bit. I'm going to close the video by showing you one more thing. This response got a score of 4 from the e-rater. Now you can see it's exactly the same as the first one I showed you, except I changed one thing. Can you see what it is? I took out while at the beginning. Remember, I used the subordinating conjunction while, and I said, while I appreciate the points mentioned by Jack and Emily, I think that social media stars aren't particularly influential nowadays. I just changed that. Instead of using the subordinating conjunction, I put in the coordinating conjunction but, and suddenly it's a score of 4. So as you can see, this is a very good answer, but it does have a little bit less grammatical sophistication. And just making that one small change dropped the score all the way down to a 4 out of 5. So I do want to emphasize that formula I suggested earlier. 1 subordinating conjunction, 3 coordinating conjunctions, 2 of which are unique, about 110, 120 words, and correct grammar. Now, there are other ways to make your grammar more sophisticated. You don't necessarily need to use the formula I suggested, but I think that is sort of the best. Like, for example, this one, the second answer, I can still probably take out the subordinating conjunction since, and it'll probably still get a 5 because it's more sophisticated in other ways. But just be careful. Just show off what you do know in terms of grammar, and hopefully you'll get a score of 5. All right, I am going to leave it at that, but if you want to know more about what I do, you can check me out at TOEFLresources.com. That's my website. It contains guides to every section of the test, and if you want to get extra help with the TOEFL, you could contact me about tutoring, or you can contact me about my essay evaluation service where I will check your practice answers and give detailed feedback. I'll put a link to all of that stuff in the video description down below. All right, so that is another video about the new writing task. I'm going to try to upload a whole bunch of videos about this in the days and weeks ahead because I know people have a ton of questions. Meanwhile, if you do want more samples, you want to read a text guide to this, they are on the website. I'll link them down below. So anyways, I will talk to you all later. Take care. Until then, goodbye.